Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being truly well-informed. Today, we're unlocking the gates to one of the world's most mysterious and, frankly, magnificent sites, China's Forbidden City. Our mission, plain and simple, is to go beyond those glossy photos. We want to reveal the sheer ingenuity, the deep symbolism, and, the gripping human drama woven into this colossal complex. Just the name, Forbidden City, immediately sparks curiosity, doesn't it? Okay, let's dig into this. How truly forbidden was it? And why does it still resonate so deeply in Chinese history?
Well, what's truly fascinating here is that the Forbidden City wasn't just some grand palace. It was the very pulse of imperial China for, get this, over 5 centuries. From 1420 right up to 1924, it served as the political and ceremonial heart. It's actually the world's largest preserved royal palace complex. Today, it's known as a palace museum, and it's been a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1987. Its story is really one of monumental ambition and, well, enduring legacy.
That sheer scale and its reputation as forbidden are definitely captivating. So when we hear Forbidden City, or Zijincheng, we're not just talking about a poetic description, are we? I heard the forbidden aspect was, well, no joke, unauthorized entry literally meant execution. That's a serious prohibition.
Oh, absolutely. Stark reality, enforced with the ultimate price.
And speaking of its name, you mentioned the purple part earlier. What's the deeper, maybe, cosmic meaning behind that color?
Right, the Z, or purple, in Zijincheng. It isn't just a color, it's celestial. It's quite profound, actually. Ancient Chinese astronomers called the North Star the Ziwei Star, considering it the heavenly abode of the Jade Emperor, the sort of supreme deity. The sky around it, the Ziwei enclosure, was seen as the divine imperial court.
Oh.
So, the Forbidden City, as the earthly emperor's residence, was deliberately designed to be a direct terrestrial mirror of that celestial palace. The Jin part signifies prohibition or taboo, and Cheng simply means a city or fortification. Although today, most Chinese just call it Gugong, former palace. But its ancient roots are deeply, deeply intertwined with the cosmos.
A terrestrial reflection of a celestial palace.
Wow.
That really gives you a sense of the boundless ambition of its creators.
Yeah.
How did such a monumental vision even begin to take shape? What was the spark for this creation? And how long did it actually take to bring this marvel to life?
Well, this massive project was born from an emperor's decree. Simple as that, in a way. In 1406, Zhu Di, who became the Yongle emperor, decided to move China's capital from Nanjing up to Beijing. What followed was an incredible 14-year construction marathon from 1406 to 1420, and it involved over 1 million workers. 1 million.
14 years. 1 million workers. That's mind-boggling.
It really is. This wasn't just construction. It was an exercise in logistics and sheer imperial might. Imagine sourcing precious phoebizun and wood from these distant, dangerous jungles. That journey alone took years and cost countless lives. It just shows the emperor's absolute command over his entire empire.
Wow.
And those golden bricks you hear about, the ones underfoot in the major halls, each one was a painstaking craft, taking months to make, baked from special clays in Suzhou, literally paving the emperor's path with wealth and symbolism.
It's lures of golden bricks.
Yeah.
It truly was an imperial endeavor from the ground up, becoming the heart of the Ming Dynasty then. How long did it serve as China's imperial seat, and what dramatic events reshaped its role over the centuries? Because it saw a lot, right?
Oh, absolutely. From its grand completion in 1420, it served as the Ming Dynasty's heart right until 1644. That year, rebel forces led by Li Zicheng captured Beijing. Now, though he soon fled, he left parts of the Forbidden City in flames, a real disaster. Later that same year, the Manchu Qing dynasty took control, proclaiming the Xinzi emperor right within its walls.
So a major shift in power.
Exactly. And this wasn't just a change in emperors, it physically reshaped the city. The Qing rulers actually renamed principal buildings to emphasize harmony over the Ming's supremacy. They added bilingual nameplates, Manchu and Chinese, and even incorporated shamanist elements reflecting their own Manchu heritage.
Interesting. So the city itself changed with the rulers.
Precisely. And the Forbidden City continued to witness some extreme turbulence. It was occupied by Anglo-French forces during the Second Opium War in 1860. Then again in 1900 during the Boxer Rebellion, that's when Empress Dowager Cixi had to flee. The imperial era finally officially ended in 1912 with Puyi's abdication.
The last emperor.
The last emperor, yes. He was actually allowed to live in the inner court until his eviction in 1924. And right after that, in 1925, the Palace Museum was established. But its treasures faced more peril in 1933 with the Japanese invasion. This necessitated a massive evacuation effort, incredible story in itself. While many pieces returned after World War II, a significant portion ended up going to Taiwan, forming the core of the National Palace Museum in Taipei.
Right, I've heard about that split.
Yeah. And later, during the Cultural Revolution, Premier Zhu Enlai famously dispatched an army battalion specifically to protect the city from destruction. That probably saved it. And today, it continues to evolve, with extensive restoration projects aiming to open more and more of its historical spaces to the public.
It's incredible to think of the centuries of, well, tumultuous history contained within those walls. It truly feels like a city within a city. That immense scale makes me wonder about its physical blueprint. Can you help us truly visualize its layout and maybe debunk that famous myth about its countless rooms?
It is definitely a city meticulously designed within a city. You've got that right. Picture a massive rectangle, nearly a kilometer long from north to south, and about 3/4 of a kilometer wide. It covers 72 hectares. That's roughly 180 acres. Huge space.
Okay, yeah, that's big.
As for the myth of 9,999 rooms, it's a wonderfully persistent tale. And while the number 9 was highly auspicious, very important, a comprehensive survey actually counted 8,886 bays of rooms. A bay is basically the space between 4 structural pillars.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So almost, but
Yeah.
not quite 10,000. Still a massive number.
Still huge, yeah. Its layout is a grand quadrangle, the very intentional center of ancient Beijing. It's nestled concentrically within the larger imperial city, which itself was part of the inner city, layers upon layers. And its symbolic importance continues today. Its central north-south axis extends directly through Tiananmen Gate, through Tiananmen Square, and further north to Jingshan Park and beyond. It anchors the city.
Right.
What's even more intriguing, perhaps, is that this axis isn't perfectly north-south. It has a slight kilt, just over 2 degrees, and that's believed to align it with Chengdu, the Yuan dynasty's former capital.
That slight tilt is a fascinating detail. Wow. Subtly connecting it to even older imperial legacies, and the idea of concentric cities really drives home the Forbidden City as this, untouchable core.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about its defenses. Those walls and gates weren't merely decorative, were they? What unique features made it such an imposing fortress of power?
Oh, they were absolutely formidable. A fortress, first and foremost, no question. The Forbidden City is encircled by this imposing wall, almost 8 meters high. And beyond that, a moat that's 6 meters deep and a remarkable 52 meters wide. That's as wide as an Olympic swimming pool.
52 meters wide.
Yeah. And the walls themselves were engineered for resilience. They had a rammed earth core faced with 3 layers of specially baked bricks built to last. And at each of the 4 corners, you'll find these incredibly intricate corner towers. They have 72 ridges, supposedly echoing famous Song Dynasty pavilions. These aren't just architectural delights either. Folklore suggests they were so complex that artisans struggled to rebuild them after damage until, a master carpenter mysteriously appeared.
A bit of legend mixed in.
Always. Now, while 4 monumental gates pierce its formidable walls, the most iconic is undoubtedly the Meridian Gate to the south. That's the main entrance. It's adorned with 81 auspicious golden doornails, a perfect 9x9 array. It was a visual declaration of the emperor's supreme authority. You couldn't miss it. And its central gateway, the Imperial Way, was almost exclusively reserved for the emperor himself. Imagine the power in that single restricted path.
The Meridian Gate, the Imperial Way, you really get the sense of the ceremonial grandeur and, the exclusivity. Let's step inside, past that magnificent entrance, and explore the outer court. That's the southern section, right? Primarily for imperial ceremonies. What would a visitor, maybe an official back then, experience on this grand stage of imperial spectacle, and which structures truly define the emperor's power?
Okay, so after passing through the Meridian Gate, you'd find yourself in this vast plaza. It's bisected by the winding inner Golden Water River, which you cross via 5 elegant marble bridges. Very picturesque, but also symbolic. Beyond that lies the Gate of Supreme Harmony, and that leads you to the architectural heart of the outer court. A breathtaking 3-tiered white marble terrace. Huge. And on top of this terrace stand 3 magnificent halls. The most prominent, the Hall of Supreme Harmony, stands 30 meters high. It's the largest surviving wooden structure in China.
30 meters. That's enormous for a wooden building.
It really is. Its dimensions, 9 bays wide and 5 bays deep, are symbolically linked to the emperor's supreme majesty. 9 and 5 being imperial numbers. Above the throne, inside, there's an intricate caisson ceiling with a coiled dragon and a kind of mirrored sphere called the Swanyu and Mirror. It would have gazed down upon enthronements, investitures, imperial weddings, the big stuff. Then you have the Hall of Central Harmony, smaller, used as a place for the emperor to prepare and rest during ceremonies. And the Hall of Preserving Harmony was famously used for rehearsals and also as the final stage of the imperial examination system. All three, of course, housed imperial thrones.
Wow, okay. The outer court was clearly designed to project absolute, almost divine power. But what about the inner court, that northern section? This was the forbidden residential area, right? How did daily life unfold for the imperial family? And how did power truly function in that more private inner sanctum?
Right, the inner court. This is where the emperor and his family truly lived and worked. Day-to-day stuff happened here. Especially in the Qing dynasty, emperors conducted most state affairs here. The outer court became primarily for those grand ceremonies we just talked about. At the very heart of the inner court are the back three palaces. The Palace of Heavenly Purity, the Hall of Union, and the Palace of Earthly Tranquility.
Okay.
Their roles were deeply symbolic. The emperor, representing Yang, the heavens, traditionally resided in the Palace of Heavenly Purity. The empress, representing Yin, the earth, resided in the Palace of Earthly Tranquility. And the Hall of Union, situated between them, symbolized the harmonious blending of yin and yang. You get the idea.
Yes, that cosmic balance again.
Exactly. Now, the Palace of Heavenly Purity. It was originally the Ming Emperor's main residence. Later, it became more of an audience hall for king emperors after the Yongzheng Emperor moved his living quarters out of respect for his predecessor. It also features a magnificent coiled dragon caisson above its throne, similar to the Hall of Supreme Harmony. The Palace of Earthly Tranquility, initially the empress's residence, was famously converted by the Manchu king rulers for shamanist worship, though 2 rooms were kept reserved specifically for the emperor's wedding night.
Interesting mix of uses then.
Very. And the Square Hall of Union, tucked between them, housed the 25 imperial seals of the Qing dynasty, very important symbols of power. Behind these main halls, you find the Imperial Garden, which is relatively small but meticulously landscaped, a place for some quiet contemplation, perhaps. But here's where it gets really interesting for day-to-day power. To the west of this central axis is the Hall of Mental Cultivation.
Hall of Mental Cultivation sounds important.
It absolutely was. From the Yongzheng Emperor onwards, this became the de facto residence and office for king emperors. It's also where formidable empresses dowager, like Cixi, famously held court from behind a screen, wielding immense influence. This hall, surrounded by the offices of the Grand Council, the emperor's key advisors, was the true nerve center of imperial power in the later Qing dynasty. And just to top it off, the Qinong Emperor even built the Palace of Tranquil Longevity for his planned retirement up in the northeast corner. It's basically a complex that mirrors the entire Forbidden City itself, complete with its own outer and inner courts.
A mini Forbidden City for retirement. That's quite the perk. Was this complex actively used by the Qinong Emperor? Or was it more of a symbolic gesture for his golden years?
Well, he did use it sometimes, mostly for symbolic gestures, receiving officials there in his later years. It was about maintaining his imperial dignity, even in supposed retirement. He didn't fully retreat.
Right. Okay, so given the scale and complexity of imperial life, I'm curious about the many other individuals who lived within these walls. What about the imperial consorts and other family members? What do their residences look like? And what does this tell us about a complex social hierarchy of the time?
Yes. The Forbidden City was a meticulously organized universe, and the residences beyond the main axis definitely reflect that hierarchy. To the west and east of the inner court's central palaces were the 6 western palaces and the 6 eastern palaces. These served as residences for imperial consorts. Their architecture and layout were pretty uniform. Each complex usually had courtyards, main halls for receptions, and then back areas for living quarters. A ranking consort, like an imperial consort or noble consort, would be granted a main residence, and she might oversee lower-ranking consorts living in the side halls within that same palace complex. It clearly illustrated the strict social order.
So even the living arrangements reinforced the hierarchy.
Absolutely. And many king emperors were actually born and grew up in these very palaces. For example, the formidable Empress Dowager Cixi, often called the Western Empress, resided in one of the Western palaces, which cemented her informal title.
Beyond the intricate daily life and strict hierarchy, I'm also curious about the spiritual pulse of the Forbidden City. What role did religion play within these walls? Which spiritual traditions were most prevalent in imperial life?
Religion was immensely important, yeah, especially during the Qing dynasty. Manchu shamanism, reflecting the ruling family's ethnic origins, had a dedicated space. As I mentioned, the Palace of Earthly Tranquility was converted partly for Manchu ceremonies. Native Chinese Taoist religion also maintained an important role, and there were at least 2 dedicated Taoist shrines within the complex. However, Tibetan Buddhism, or Lamaism as it was often called, was highly prevalent in the Qing court. Numerous temples and shrines were scattered throughout the inner court, and Buddhist iconography was integrated into many of the interior decorations. The Pavilion of the Rain of Flowers, for instance, stands out as a really significant site. It housed a vast collection of Buddhist statues, mandalas, and other artifacts in elaborate ritualistic arrangements.
So a real mix of spiritual practices coexisting within the walls.
Definitely, reflecting the complex cultural and political landscape of the Qing Empire.
It's clear the Forbidden City wasn't just a dwelling, but a universe unto itself. But let's broaden our perspective for a moment. How did this colossal complex integrate with, or perhaps dominate, the larger city of Beijing around it?
Well, it was meticulously placed as the undisputed center of Beijing, no question about that. And its surroundings were equally grand and strategically chosen. To the north, you have Jingshan Park. That's actually an artificial hill created from the very soil excavated for the Forbidden City's moat.
Wow, really? So the hill came from digging the moat?
Exactly, a testament to the scale of the earthworks involved. To its west lies Zhongnanhai, now the CCP headquarters, and Beihai Park, both former royal gardens centered on lakes. Beautiful spaces. To the south were crucial state shrines, the Imperial Ancestral Temple for venerating ancestors, and the Imperial Shrine of State, sometimes called the Altar of Land and Grain. These were vital for imperial legitimacy. Today, the Forbidden City precinct connects directly to modern Beijing via the Upright Gate and, of course, the famous Tiananmen Gate, which leads directly into Tiananmen Square. It's still the symbolic heart of modern China in many ways.
That puts its placement in Beijing into such clear context. You can really see how it anchored the whole city, past and present. But let's hone in on the architecture itself again. Every detail seems so deliberate, so symbolic. I'm fascinated by the consistent color of the roofs, for example. Why yellow? What profound meanings are literally built into its architecture?
You're absolutely right. Every single architectural choice was a deliberate statement. It was all meticulously planned to reflect philosophical and religious principles and, above all, to symbolize the majesty of imperial power. Take color symbolism, as you mentioned. Yellow is the emperor's color. It represents the center, the earth element in the 5-element theory. That's why almost all roofs gleam with those iconic yellow glazed tiles.
Almost all. What are the exceptions?
Just a couple of notable ones. The library, the Pavilion of Literary Profundity, has black tiles. Black was associated with water and thus believed to help prevent fire, quite practical. And green tiles, symbolizing wood and growth, were used for the crown prince's residences.
Okay, that makes sense. Symbolism with practical or hierarchical meaning.
Precisely. And even the arrangement of buildings speaks a symbolic language. The main halls of the outer court, for example, often come in groups of 3. That number represents the Qian trigram from the I Ching, which symbolizes heaven. A clear nod to the emperor's divine connection, the son of heaven, and the residences in the inner court, often arranged in clusters of 6, embodying the Kun trigram, representing earth. It's this continuous interplay between heaven and earth, power and nature, woven into every architectural choice.
That's incredible, like a code built into the city.
It really is. And if you look closely at the sloping ridges of the main roofs, you'll see a line of small ceramic statuettes. They're led by a man riding a phoenix, followed by an imperial dragon, and then various mythical beasts. The number of these statuettes indicates the building's status. More figures mean higher status. The Hall of Supreme Harmony, fitting its supreme status, is unique. It has 10 statuettes, the maximum possible, including a special final figure called a hangshi, or ranked 10th, found only there.
10 statuettes. From the colors to the statuettes, it really is a language of power and cosmology carved in stone and wood. It's truly magnificent. Now let's pivot from the structure itself to the, well, priceless objects it housed and still houses today.
Yeah.
What kind of treasures are found within the Palace Museum's collections? What makes them so significant?
Oh, the Palace Museum's collections are simply staggering. Just mind-blowing, really. We're talking about almost 2 million pieces of priceless art. And that's primarily inherited directly from the Qing Imperial Collection, so it's the emperor's stuff, basically.
2 million pieces.
Yeah. Imagine nearly 50,000 paintings alone, with over 400 predating the Yuan dynasty. That's before the Ming even built the Forbidden City. It's the largest collection of its kind in China. There are 340,000 pieces of exquisite ceramics and porcelain, including imperial collections reaching back to the Tang and Song dynasties. Absolutely stunning pieces. Its bronze collection is vast, too. Nearly 10,000 pieces, with many ancient ceremonial bronzeware dating from before the Qin dynasty, over 2,000 years old.
Wow, the historical depth is amazing.
It really is. And beyond these, you have seals, sculptures, precious enamel objects. The imperial libraries also held immense collections of rare books and historical documents, many unique. What's truly unique, perhaps, are some specialized collections. Like, it has one of the world's largest collections of 18th and 19th century mechanical timepieces, over 1,000 pieces, many intricate clocks made in Britain or France for the imperial court.
Clocks.
Yes, the emperors loved them. And given the profound place of jade in Chinese culture, the museum holds some 30,000 pieces of jade, with the earliest dating all the way back to the Neolithic period. But what ties it all together, really, is that a large proportion of the collection consists of court artifacts, things that preserve the daily life and ceremonial protocols of the imperial era. It's not just art, it's a living record.
From ancient bronzes to exquisite timepieces, it really is a window into an entire civilization. So, as we wrap up our deep dive here, how does this ancient complex continue to resonate today? What's its enduring legacy? How has it influenced modern times and popular culture?
Well, the Forbidden City's legacy is profound and really far-reaching. Architecturally, it's been incredibly influential on subsequent Chinese building styles and even beyond China. And it served as an inspiration for countless artistic works, paintings, literature, you name it. In popular culture, it's just an instantly recognizable, iconic setting. It's been depicted in films going way back, like the 1918 silent movie The Forbidden City. More famously, Bertolucci's The Last Emperor in 1987 was the very first feature film officially authorized to shoot inside the complex. That gave the world this unprecedented, stunning glimpse inside.
I remember that film. Visually spectacular.
Exactly. You'll also find it referenced in comedies like Stephen Chow's Forbidden City Cop, and it's celebrated as a world wonder you can build in video games like Rise of Nations and the Civilization series. It just symbolizes advanced civilization and power in the popular imagination.
What an incredible journey through the Forbidden City. We've gone from its cosmic origins, its incredible scale, the ceremonial grandeur, and those intimate imperial lives. We've seen it as a fortress of power, a marvel of engineering, and of course a repository of immense history and culture. It's a meticulous design where, as you said, every detail tells a story that truly sets it apart. Considering everything we've explored, what's the ultimate takeaway for understanding China's rich, complex imperial history?
I think the key takeaway is that the Forbidden City is far more than just a collection of beautiful old buildings. It's really an embodiment of an entire imperial system and a deeply ingrained cultural identity. It stands as this physical testament to the ambitions, the beliefs, the artistic prowess of past dynasties, and it's often viewed by the Chinese public today as a kind of cultural, almost heavenly link to their ancestors. Which, raises an important question for all of us, I think. What impact do these grand, highly structured spaces, designed centuries ago for absolute power, have on the collective memory and imagination of a nation today? And maybe also, how do forbidden places like this, places once restricted to only a select few, adapt to tell their complex stories to millions of people from all around the world now?
So if you really want a masterclass in modern geopolitical power, you have to look at the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. It is arguably the biggest and, most successful military alliance in history.
It absolutely is. And it's an organization founded on a very simple but incredibly powerful promise: collective security.
Right.
That promise is really what we need to unpack today, because it's shifted pretty radically over the past 75 years.
Absolutely. NATO was formally set up, April 4th, 1949? And the scale today is just enormous.
Yeah.
We're talking 32 member states now, 30 European, plus the 2 North American anchors, the U.S. and Canada.
And the foundational element, the bit every deep dive into NATO has to start with, is Article 5.
The famous one.
That's the ultimate guarantee, right? An armed attack against one member is considered an attack against all of them. It's the strategic nucleus of the whole thing.
So our mission today is to move past just the basic history. We want to get into the evolution of NATO. How did an organization explicitly built To deter the Soviet Union, find a new identity after 1991.
Yeah, what happens when the threat disappears?
Exactly. And what do its current, let's say, controversies from, huge spending increases to its ongoing expansion, what does all that mean for the global power balance today? Let's dive into the foundation first.
Okay, so to really get the modern alliance, you have to see that NATO wasn't just created in a vacuum in '49.
Right.
Its strategic roots, they go back further. You can trace them through the Atlantic Charter in 1941, which kind of set the moral framework for post-war cooperation.
Okay.
And then more directly, you've got the 1948 Brussels Treaty Organization. That created the initial defense structure for Western Europe.
So it wasn't totally new, more like a formal transatlantic commitment to defense that had been sort of brewing for years.
Precisely. And that formality, of course, was exactly what the Soviets saw as a direct threat.
Which led straight to their rival bloc, the Warsaw Pact, in 1955.
And we can pinpoint the exact trigger for that. West Germany joined NATO in 1955.
Ah.
The Warsaw Pact was formed just days later. It was a clear line drawn in the sand. The Cold War world split in two.
Within that early structure, though, some members acted in, pretty unconventional ways. I'm thinking about France here.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Founding member. But they made that very famous decision in 1966 to pull out of the integrated military structure. What did that actually mean operationally for NATO for the next, 40-odd years?
That's a really crucial detail. When France pulled out in '66, they weren't leaving the alliance itself. They still signed the treaty. Article 5 still applied to them.
Okay.
But they refused to put their military forces under direct, permanent NATO command during peacetime. It was all about President de Gaulle's push for, absolute French sovereignty, an independent nuclear deterrent.
Right, Gaullism.
Exactly. And for NATO, it meant a massive operational headache. French forces couldn't join in the pre-planned defense exercises the same way, and NATO headquarters actually had to move.
From Paris to Brussels.
From Paris to Brussels. It made things complicated.
That really highlights the tension, doesn't it, between national sovereignty and collective defense. A tension that, honestly, still defines NATO today.
It absolutely does.
But let's look at the mechanics that actually govern that collective defense. Everyone focuses on Article 5.
Right. And it is the ultimate guarantee. But it's worth remembering this clause has only been invoked once.
Once in 75 years.
Just once, in response to the September 11th attacks in 2001.
So if Article 5 is kind of the ultimate backstop, what mechanism does NATO use more regularly, for handling current threats like tensions on the eastern flank or border issues?
That would be Article 4. Article 4 is the consultation mechanism. It basically just says members will consult whenever the territorial integrity, political independence, or security of any member is threatened. It's really the workhorse of the alliance, politically speaking.
And how often does that get used?
Much more often than Article 5. It's been formally invoked at least 7 times, usually by Turkey, actually.
Interesting. Why Turkey?
Well, think about its location. During the Iraq War, they were worried about spillover. In 2014, after Russia annexed Crimea, and then repeatedly because of threats spilling over from the Syrian civil war on their southeastern border.
I see.
So Article 4 is how NATO manages political de-escalation. It shows unity without immediately jumping to a military response.
Okay, here's where the details get really fascinating, though. If a member is attacked, that Article 5 response isn't mandatory everywhere on Earth, is it? There's a geographic limit in Article 6.
Precisely. Article 6 puts a very clear geographic boundary on the mandatory collective defense trigger. It only applies to attacks on member territory in Europe, North America, Turkey, and islands in the North Atlantic. But, and this is the key bit, only islands north of the Tropic of Cancer.
That is an incredible detail. So like Hawaii wouldn't count, or French Guiana?
Technically, no. Not for the mandatory Article 5 response. It really shows you NATO's origins as a purely North Atlantic defensive pact.
Wow. So an attack south of that line might trigger Article 4 consultations, maybe political action, but not necessarily the automatic military response from everyone.
Exactly. Which perfectly sets the stage for the huge operational shift after 1991.
Right. Cold War ends.
The Soviet Union dissolves.
Yeah.
Suddenly, NATO is this massive alliance without its main reason for existing. It had to rapidly find a new purpose, moving from just containment to tackling new things like political crisis management, even humanitarian concerns.
And that search for a new role led them straight into the Balkans in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
This period saw NATO's first actual wartime actions, a massive transition operationally away from the Cold War mindset.
It really was. You had Operation Deny Flight in Bosnia and Herzegovina. In 1994, NATO jets shot down 4 Bosnian Serb aircraft, violating the no-fly zone. It confirmed NATO was willing to act offensively, for humanitarian and political goals, not just pure defense.
And that paved the way for the, well, much more controversial 1999 Kosovo intervention, Operation Allied Force. That bombing campaign, it exposed some real splits within the alliance about legitimacy, didn't it?
It really did. The key argument was between the U.S. and U.K. on one side, arguing military strikes didn't need a specific UN Security Council resolution because of the immediate humanitarian crisis.
Right.
And allies like France, on the other, who felt that acting without explicit UN backing undermined international law and, frankly, NATO's own legitimacy.
So not just a policy disagreement, but a fundamental one about whether NATO could or should act unilaterally outside a UN mandate.
Exactly. It was a deep divide.
And despite those internal debates, the ultimate operational test arrived on September 11, 2001. Invoking Article 5 then led to the deployment of the NATO-led force, ISAF, in Afghanistan.
Yep, the International Security Assistance Force. This became the alliance's defining mission for almost 2 decades. And importantly, its first major mission way outside the North Atlantic area. ISAF grew huge, eventually involving troops from over 40 countries, allies, and partners.
Showcasing NATO's global reach, as you say. But the end of that mission, the chaotic withdrawal in 2021, many people called it a debacle, the greatest debacle even, some politicians said. What did that reveal about the structural limits of a multinational alliance like NATO?
Well, it showed that keeping everyone on the same page during an intervention is one thing. Keeping that unity during an extraction, especially a difficult one, is much, much harder. Because, fundamentally, operational forces remain under national command. We'll come back to this, but when political agreement back in the various capital cities started to fray, the integrated NATO command structure struggled. It couldn't force a unified, orderly exit if key members weren't fully committed politically to the plan at that moment.
So consensus is needed not just to start something, but critically, to finish it cleanly.
Absolutely critical. And you see that same sort of tension in other post-Cold War operations, too.
Like Libya.
Yeah, take the 2011 Libya intervention, Operation Unified Protector. NATO enforced the no-fly zone, sure, but only 8 out of the 28 members at the time actually took part in combat operations.
8 out of 28, that's a big difference.
It's a key point. It shows that when Article 5 isn't triggered when it's crisis management, not self-defense members feel much freer to impose national restrictions, what they call caveats, or just opt out of the riskier parts, like combat.
This ability to kind of pick and choose involvement must be a constant challenge for alliance cohesion.
It definitely is. And that tension brings us right up to the present day, especially when we talk about enlargement.
Right. Since the Cold War ended, NATO's added 16 new members, fundamentally redrawing the map of Europe.
And this eastward expansion has been, well, let's be blunt, the single biggest ongoing source of friction with Russia.
Going way back.
You can trace it right back to the 1990s. There are memoranda, documents that reveal assurances given, or at least perceived by, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, assurances that NATO wouldn't expand its jurisdiction further east after Germany reunified.
Assurances that were arguably not kept, especially when former Warsaw Pact nations started joining.
Exactly. Russia sees that expansion as a direct breach of a strategic understanding, maybe even a promise. Whereas NATO countries argue quite strongly that sovereign nations have the absolute right to choose their own alliances. It's a core principle for them.
2 very different narratives there.
Yeah.
But the whole dynamic just shifted massively in 2022.
Oh, profoundly. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine completely changed the calculus for 2 historically neutral countries.
Finland and Sweden.
Finland joined in 2023. Sweden followed in 2024. They decided neutrality wasn't enough anymore. This action, it effectively doubled NATO's direct land border with Russia and completely altered the strategic picture in the Baltic Sea. It's hard to overstate the shift.
And the military response on that eastern flank has been equally profound. You mentioned the NATO response force being fully activated for the first time. What does that enhanced posture actually look like on the ground now?
It means boots on the ground, basically. Immediate deterrence. We're talking about 40,000 troops deployed along that, 2,500-kilometer eastern flank, mainly in the Baltic states and Poland.
And these aren't just rotating troops?
Increasingly, no. We're seeing longer-term stationing commitments. Germany, for instance, has pledged a full armored brigade to be permanently based in Lithuania by 2025. Plus, you have specific initiatives like Operation Eastern Sentry, launched because of Russian drone incursions into Polish airspace. It shows NATO is now in a mode of continuous, high-alert deterrence.
All this military activity, these deployments, they cost money. Which brings us to the famous 2% financial target.
Ah, yes, the 2%.
Since 2014, after the first Ukraine crisis, members committed to spending at least 2% of their GDP on defense, a goal pushed hard, especially by the U.S. for years.
And that commitment is finally really bearing fruit, largely because the threat perception changed so dramatically after 2022. Secretary General Stoltenberg announced in 2024 that a record 23 out of the 32 members are expected to meet or beat that 2% target.
23 out of 32. That's a huge shift, financially and politically. What does that surge really mean strategically? Is it just about, appeasing the U.S., or does it signal something deeper about European defense?
I think it signals a really profound shift towards maybe not full autonomy, but certainly greater European responsibility for defense.
Okay.
This surge represents an 18% increase in defense spending by European members. And Canada, in just the past year, it's about showing European defense is serious. It's about reducing that strategic dependency on the U.S., at least for basic deterrence in Europe. And it's definitely fueling European defense industries. It's changing the continent's whole defense posture.
Before we wrap up, let's quickly touch on the top level of NATO's structure. Who actually calls the shots?
Okay, so the highest political decision-making body is the North Atlantic Council, the NAC. Ambassadors from all 32 countries sit on it.
Yeah.
And crucially, decisions in the NAC are made by consensus.
Consensus, not voting.
No voting, no majority rule. Every single one of the 32 member states has to agree for a major policy or operation to be approved. Everyone has a veto, essentially.
Wow, that sounds almost impossible to manage with 32 different national interests, especially given the divisions we talked about over things like Libya or Kosovo.
It is incredibly difficult, and it's exactly why NATO is fundamentally a political alliance first, which then sometimes acts militarily. That consensus rule is what protects every member's sovereignty. It ensures every voice, big or small, has to be heard and accommodated.
Which brings us perfectly to our final thought. We've traced NATO's evolution, right, from Cold War deterrent Article 5 dormant to this modern crisis management alliance, now flexing its muscles with 23 members hitting that 2% target. But you mentioned earlier, despite all this coordinated power, the alliance itself fundamentally lacks sovereignty.
It's the absolute core paradox of NATO. You have this integrated command structure, SASUR and all that, but the alliance itself cannot perform certain basic sovereign functions.
Like what, for example?
Well, a NATO commander, no matter how senior, cannot actually discipline or punish offenses, like failure to obey an order committed by a soldier from a member nation.
Really?
Yes. Those operational forces, they always remain under national command. They never lose their national character, their national chain of command for discipline, for law.
So even when, say, a Polish battalion is operating right alongside a German one under a unified NATO field command, the Polish soldiers ultimately answer to Warsaw for discipline and the German soldiers to Berlin.
Exactly right. And this is what leads to those operational limits we sometimes see, things like red card holders.
What are those?
They're senior national representatives embedded within a NATO command structure. They have the authority, literally on the fly, to veto or prevent their national forces from participating in a specific action if it goes against national policy or caveats.
So they can pull their troops out of an action.
Or limit how they engage. They impose national caveats rules limiting where, when, or how their specific national troops can be used, even within a broader NATO mission.
That's a fascinating constraint. So the provocative thought to leave you, the listener, with is this. NATO is this alliance of incredible historic scale and military power. Yet its actual ability to act, especially decisively and quickly, is constantly filtered through this need for 32 separate sovereign nations to agree, both politically and operationally, sometimes down to the actions of individual units. How that delicate, sometimes messy balance of sovereignty and collective action handles the speed and severity of future global challenges, well, that's going to define the next chapter for NATO. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a topic that, well, it touches so many lives. Dementia. It's profound, often misunderstood, and frankly, it can feel a bit daunting.
Mm-hmm.
So our mission is clear. We're diving into a stack of your sources, research articles, even a detailed Wikipedia entry to pull out the most important nuggets, surprising facts, and practical insights about dementia. We want to give you clarity and real value.
Yeah, it's a really vital conversation to have because dementia is, it's far more complex than just one single disease, and our understanding, it's changing all the time.
Right.
Getting accurate, accessible information out there is just key for navigating this, especially when it affects so many families.
Okay, so let's unpack this right from the start. What is dementia really? A crucial point from our sources is the definition itself. It's not one specific disease.
Exactly. It's a syndrome. Think of it like an umbrella term.
Right, a collection of symptoms from lots of different neurodegenerative conditions, basically, diseases where brain cells gradually break down.
Mm-hmm. And the core thing is that general decline in cognitive abilities, thinking, remembering, reasoning, that significantly affects a person's ability to do everyday things.
And here's something vital from the sources. Dementia is not a normal part of aging.
Absolutely not, even though getting older is the biggest risk factor.
Yeah, you find plenty of people, well into their 90s with no signs of it at all.
That distinction is so important. And beyond just memory loss, the symptoms can be really broad. We're talking noticeable problems with thinking, changes in behavior, difficulties with motor control, even emotional shifts, language issues, and maybe just decreased motivation, like not wanting to do things.
So for a diagnosis, they're looking for a definite change.
A clear change, yeah, from how someone usually functions mentally, a decline that's, greater than you'd expect just from normal aging. And we have to understand, it is a life-limiting condition. It has a huge impact, not just on the individual, but on caregivers, family, their whole social circle.
Hearing that, it makes you want to understand the journey. What does this progression actually look like? Our sources talk about a typical course, these 4 main stages, pre-dementia, early, middle, and late.
Mm-hmm. And while clinicians use detailed scales, number systems to map it out, what really stands out early on are the subtle shifts.
So tell us about that first stage, the pre-dementia stage.
Right. This is where it gets really interesting because it can be incredibly subtle. There's what we call a preclinical phase. And get this, sensory changes can show up maybe even 10 years before the more obvious signs.
10 years? Like what?
Specifically, a loss of the sense of smell. It's quite notable. And this can sometimes go along with depression or loss of appetite, poor nutrition.
Why smell?
Well, the theory is, think about your nose with the olfactory epithelium, the part responsible for smell. It's directly exposed to the environment, right?
Yeah.
So one idea is that this exposure might let toxic stuff cause early damage to those sensitive brain networks linked to smell.
Fascinating. Okay, what comes after preclinical?
Then you have the prodromal stage. This includes things like mild cognitive impairment, MCI, and mild behavioral impairment. These are those subtle early signs people often only recognize looking back.
Like small memory slips.
Exactly. Memory problems, maybe trouble finding the right word sometimes. But the person can still handle their life affairs competently. Brain changes are happening, but the symptoms aren't severe enough yet to really disrupt daily function.
And this NCI is significant.
Very. Here's a statistic that really stands out. 70% of people diagnosed with MCI later progress to dementia. 70%.
Wow.
Yeah. So this stage, this prodromal stage, it's a really critical window for things like advanced care planning, documenting wishes for future care while you still fully can.
Right. Okay, so when does it become more obvious? What defines the early stage?
So in the early stage, symptoms become noticeable to other people, and they start to interfere more with daily activities.
Like what kind of things?
Maybe difficulty with more complicated chores or tasks at work, meeting prompts for things like taking pills or doing laundry. Managing finances often becomes a real challenge around this time.
Okay.
Other signs might be getting lost in new places, repeating questions or stories, maybe some personality changes starting to show.
And does it always start with memory?
Not always. That's a good point. For certain types, like Lewy body dementia or frontotemporal dementia, personality changes or problems with planning and organization can actually be the first things you notice, sometimes even before significant memory issues pop up.
Okay, so that's the early stage. What happens as it progresses into the middle stage?
Well, as dementia moves on, those initial symptoms get worse. We're talking moderate impairment now. People typically start losing almost all new information soon after they receive it.
So short-term memory really suffers.
Severely. And complex problem solving becomes very difficult. Social judgment can be impaired too. Usually at this point, individuals can't really function safely outside their own home and they shouldn't be left alone.
And do they realize what's happening?
That's another key thing about the middle stage. A lack of insight typically becomes quite evident. They often don't understand or recognize that they have the condition.
That must be incredibly hard for families.
It is. And then you move into the late stage. This brings really profound challenges. The person often becomes increasingly inward, needing help with most or even all personal care dressing, bathing, eating.
So constant care is needed.
24-hour supervision becomes essential, yeah. For safety. Wandering is a risk, falls are common. They might not recognize common dangers like a hot stove. Incontinence often develops.
And recognizing people.
Yeah, often they can't recognize even familiar faces. Sleep patterns usually change significantly too. And eating and swallowing difficulties are really common, sometimes leading to refusing food, choking, and weight loss.
It sounds incredibly difficult.
It is, although there's this rare, kind of intriguing phenomenon called terminal lucidity.
What's that?
It's an unexpected temporary return of mental clarity, sometimes right before death. It's not common, but it happens.
Wow, that whole progression really highlights the complexity. So digging deeper, what's actually causing this in the brain? What are the mechanisms?
Yeah, so for many types of dementia, the underlying cause is a neurodegenerative disease. And a key feature in a lot of these is something called protein misfolding.
Misfolded protein.
Yeah, you can think of them like sticky junk proteins that build up and sort of gum up the works in the brain. The most common cause of dementia by far is Alzheimer's disease.
Right. That's one most people have heard of.
Accounts for maybe 60–70% of cases worldwide. Its classic symptoms are short-term memory loss, difficulty finding words, and trouble with visuospatial stuff like getting lost often. Reasoning, judgment, insight, those decline too.
And it affects specific brain areas.
Primarily, yes. You see atrophy or shrinking, especially in the hippocampus, which is crucial for memory, and the temporal and parietal lobes involved in language and sensory processing. And the hallmarks, the specific misfolded proteins, are beta amyloid plaques outside the brain cells and tau tangles inside them.
Plaques and tangles.
Exactly. And that amyloid buildup also triggers inflammation, which causes more damage. Oh, and interestingly, some articles we looked at mention a possible link between general anesthesia and Alzheimer's risk, especially in older adults. Still being researched, but it's out there.
Okay, what's the next most common type?
That would be vascular dementia. It accounts for at least 20% of cases, so it's significant. This type is caused by disease or injury affecting the blood supply to the brain.
Like strokes.
Typically, yeah. Often involves a series of mini strokes, or sometimes larger ones. And the symptoms really depend entirely on where in the brain the blood supply was disrupted.
And the risk factors are similar to heart disease.
Very similar. Things like tobacco use, high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, they all increase the risk for vascular problems, including in the brain.
Okay. What else is common?
Then there's dementia with Lewy bodies, or DLB.
Okay.
This one has some really distinct features. One is fluctuating cognition alertness and attention can vary dramatically, sometimes day to day or even hour to hour.
So good days and bad days, but quite extreme.
Exactly. Another key feature is REM sleep behavior disorder, or RBD. This is where people physically act out their dreams, sometimes violently. And this can actually start years before the cognitive decline kicks in.
Wow, years before.
Yeah. And they also often have repeated visual hallucinations, often quite vivid, seeing people or animals that aren't there, frequently happening as they're falling asleep or waking up. Problems with planning and visual spatial function are common too.
Okay, that sounds very different. What about frontotemporal dementias?
Frontotemporal dementias, or FTDs. These are distinct because they often hit personality and language first and hardest. Memory problems might not be the main feature, especially early on.
Personality changes. How so?
Well, in the behavioral variant called BVFTD, you might see really drastic shifts. Someone might become impulsive, lose their empathy, neglect personal hygiene, become rigid in their thinking, socially withdrawn, or even socially inappropriate.
Like saying offensive things.
Yes. Or things like making inappropriate sexual comments, maybe openly using pornography without regard for context. It can be quite shocking for families.
And the language types.
There are two main language-focused types. One is the semantic variant, where people lose the meaning of words. They have trouble naming things, might not recognize familiar objects. The other is the non-fluent agrammatic variant, where producing speech becomes difficult, the grammar breaks down. Speech might be very slow and effortful, maybe just single syllables, or they might eventually become mute. It's more about the mechanics of speech production.
Gosh, such different presentations. Are there other less common causes?
Definitely. Things like Huntington's disease, HIV infection, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease can cause dementia, and alcoholism is another one. Excessive long-term alcohol use can lead to alcohol-related dementia, often involving thiamine deficiency, that's vitamin B1. It tends to affect brain regions similar to those hit by aging and Alzheimer's.
Right.
And here's a really crucial point from the sources. It is vital to test for easily reversible causes.
Reversible, like what?
Things like hypothyroidism, an underactive thyroid, vitamin B12 deficiency, even infections like Lyme disease or neurosyphilis. If you catch and treat these underlying conditions, the dementia symptoms can sometimes improve significantly or even resolve.
That's incredibly important.
Absolutely. And one more fascinating link we found: persistent loneliness. Studies suggest it's linked to a 31% higher likelihood of developing any form of dementia.
Loneliness itself.
Seems so. And not having a partner can apparently double the risk, while having just 2 or 3 close relationships might reduce it by as much as 3/5. Social connection seems really protective for the brain.
That's a huge range of causes. It really underlines the importance of a proper diagnosis, especially checking for those reversible things. So how do clinicians diagnose these conditions, especially when symptoms can overlap?
It's definitely a challenge. As you said, symptoms can look similar across different types, especially early on. And it's interesting, the research shows that general screening for cognitive impairment across the entire older population hasn't really been shown to improve outcomes.
So not screening everyone over 65.
Not routinely, no, but screening exams are useful for individuals, say, 65 and older, who do have memory complaints or other concerns. It helps target the assessment.
And it's important to distinguish it from other things.
Absolutely. Need to rule out delirium, that's a sudden onset confusion, usually fluctuating short term, and typically linked to an acute medical issue like an infection or medication side effect. And also pseudodementias, where memory problems stem from other conditions, like severe depression or psychosis, rather than a primary dementia process.
Okay, so what tests do they use?
For cognitive testing, there are various brief screening tests, often taking 5 to 15 minutes. The Mini Mental State Exam, the MMSE, was common, but the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, or MoCA, is often preferred now.
Why the MoCA?
It seems to be better at detecting mild cognitive impairment, that very early stage. And it's freely available online in loads of languages, like 35 of them. They've even developed an adapted MoCA for people with hearing loss, which is clever, so hearing problems don't lead to a false diagnosis of cognitive issues.
That makes sense. Any newer tech?
Yeah, there's something called the Cognica. It's a 5-minute test done on an iPad, got FDA approval in 2021, and seems highly sensitive to the early stages of dementia. And don't underestimate informant questionnaires like the Alzheimer's disease caregiver questionnaire. When filled out by a caregiver who knows the person well, they can be remarkably accurate, like 90% accurate.
Wow. What about lab tests?
Laboratory tests, so blood tests mainly, are crucial, but primarily to rule out those treatable causes we mentioned: vitamin B12 deficiency, thyroid problems, infections, etc.
And brain scans. Imaging.
Imaging plays a big role. Standard CT or MRI scans are great for spotting structural issues, maybe evidence of past strokes and vascular dementia, or potentially reversible things like normal pressure hydrocephalus or even a brain tumor.
What about showing the dementia itself?
For assessing long-standing cognitive problems and trying to differentiate between types, functional neuroimaging is more useful. Things like SPECT and PATE scans. They show how the brain is actually working, its metabolic activity, not just its structure. This can help distinguish between, say, Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. And there's even specialized PATE imaging, like PATE, that can actually visualize the amyloid plaques associated with Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
That can be really useful for predictive diagnosis.
Incredible technology. But shifting gears a bit, what really struck me in the sources is how many risk factors are actually modifiable, things we can potentially do something about.
That's probably one of the most empowering messages, isn't it?
Absolutely. It feels like taking back some control. The list is pretty long. High blood pressure, high LDL cholesterol.
The bad cholesterol, yeah.
Vision loss, hearing loss. Those were surprising. Smoking, obesity, depression, being physically inactive, diabetes, lower levels of education, low social contact, drinking too much alcohol, lack of sleep, even things like anemia, traumatic brain injury, and air pollution.
It's quite a list.
It is.
Yeah.
But the sources seem to highlight physical inactivity and a lack of cognitive stimulation as the two most modifiable risk factors, things we can actively work on.
Exactly. And when you look at lifestyle and social factors, the evidence is strong. Regular physical activity, especially aerobic exercise, seems to genuinely reduce age-related brain tissue loss, helps preserve brain volume.
Keeps the brain physically healthier.
Yeah, and cognitive activity, learning new things, staying mentally engaged, strengthens what we call neuroplasticity and cognitive reserve. Basically, it builds a more resilient brain, better able to cope with any damage that might occur.
And that loneliness factor again.
It keeps coming up. That potential one-third increased risk with loneliness, doubled risk without a partner, significantly reduced risk with just a couple of close friends. It really speaks to how important social connection is for brain health.
And the sensory stuff.
Yeah.
Hearing loss.
Yes, sensory impairments like hearing loss are now seen as modifiable risk factors, and they can precede cognitive symptoms by many years. One estimate suggested that midlife hearing loss might account for around 9% of all dementia cases worldwide. If we address hearing loss early, maybe with hearing aids, it could potentially reduce dementia risk.
Wow, 9%. That's huge. Now, you mentioned something really surprising earlier, dental health.
Yeah, this one's a bit newer, and the evidence is still described as limited, but it's intriguing. Some studies have found specific types of bacteria linked to gum disease in the brains of people who had Alzheimer's.
Bacteria from the mouth and the brain.
Potentially, yeah. And higher levels of dental plaque have also been linked to cognitive decline in some studies. It suggests a possible connection between oral inflammation and brain health.
And the herpes virus connection.
That's another startling one. The herpes simplex virus, HV1, the one that causes cold sores, is incredibly common. Over 70% of people over 50 have it. It's been found in Alzheimer's brain pathology. And a big 2024 Swedish study suggested that having an HSV infection actually doubles the risk of developing dementia later on.
Doubles the risk from a cold sore virus.
That's what the study suggests. It's a really active area of research now, the link between infections, inflammation, and dementia risk.
Fascinating and a bit scary. Okay, what about diet? Always a big topic.
Definitely a key modifiable factor. One specific nutrient highlighted is thiamine, vitamin B1. It's essential for cognitive function. And an interesting side note, gluten-free products often aren't fortified with thiamine, so people on strict gluten-free diets need to be mindful of getting enough.
Good to know. And general dietary patterns.
The Mediterranean diet and the DHA dietary approaches to stop hypertension get mentioned often as they're good for cardiovascular health, which links to brain health. But there's also a hybrid called the MIND diet.
MIND diet.
Yeah, it specifically combines elements of Mediterranean and DHA that seem most protective for the brain. Generally, these diets are low in saturated fats, high in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, healthy fats like olive oil, nuts, fish. They provide good carbohydrates to help stabilize blood sugar. And a study from the University of Exeter confirmed that diets rich in these kinds of foods can reduce dementia risk by roughly 25%.
25% reduction just from diet is pretty significant.
It really is. It shows how much lifestyle choices matter.
Okay, so we've covered causes, diagnosis, prevention. It's powerful to see how many proactive steps we can potentially take. But what happens once a diagnosis is made? Let's talk about management approaches. How do we help people live well with dementia?
Right. And the first thing the sources make very clear is that currently no medications have been shown to prevent or cure dementia. That's a tough reality, but it's where we are.
So what do the current drugs do?
The medications available now, like acetylcholinesterase inhibitors, Donepezil is a common one. They primarily treat the symptoms, behavioral, and cognitive symptoms. But the evidence shows they offer only small benefits, mostly in the mild to moderate stages. And interestingly, for managing things like agitation and aggression, non-drug approaches are often more effective.
So if meds aren't the main answer, the focus really shifts to quality of life for both the person with dementia and their caregivers.
Exactly. It's about support, environment, and activities.
What about psychological and psychosocial therapies? What works there?
There's good evidence for several approaches. Reminiscence therapy, talking about past events and experiences, often using photos or music, shows positive effects on quality of life, communication, mood, even cognition sometimes.
Bringing back positive memories.
Yeah. And cognitive reframing can be really helpful for caregivers, helping them change negative thought patterns about the challenges they face. A big one is using personally tailored activities.
Tailored how?
Matched to the individual's interests, abilities, and past experiences. These have been shown to reduce challenging behaviors like agitation and genuinely improve quality of life. It's not just busy work, it's meaningful engagement.
That makes sense. I also read a fascinating example about some London hospitals using color, designs, pictures, even lighting to help people with dementia adjust to the hospital environment and reduce confusion.
Yes, environmental modifications can make a huge difference. And music therapy is another powerful tool. Studies show it can reduce depressive symptoms, improve behaviors, boost emotional well-being, and lessen anxiety. There are projects like Singing for the Brain that harness this, even things like life story work, helping someone document their life, or animal-assisted therapy show potential benefits.
This all seems to point towards person-centered care. What does that mean exactly?
It's really a core philosophy. It means putting the individual person, not the disease, at the absolute center of care, valuing their unique history, their needs, preferences, their experiences to maintain their dignity and sense of identity even as the dementia progresses.
How does that help practically?
It's been shown to reduce agitation and depression in the person with dementia and improve their overall quality of life. And crucially, it also benefits caregivers by reducing their stress and risk of burnout. There are even specific tools, person-centered outcome measures, or PCMs, like the pain aid scale for assessing pain in advanced dementia when someone can't tell you they're hurting. It helps ensure their comfort is prioritized.
That focus on comfort leads naturally to palliative care, right? Since dementia is progressive and ultimately terminal.
Exactly. Palliative care is essential. Its focus is on comfort, quality of life, and support for both the patient and family, especially as the condition advances. It can significantly improve comfort in dying. And the recommendation is really to integrate it before the very late stages, not just at the very end.
But you mentioned public understanding is low on this.
Shockingly low. That statistic that only 42% of the public surveyed in England knew dementia is a terminal condition. Well, that creates real barriers. If people don't understand the nature of the illness, it's harder for them and their families to access appropriate specialist palliative care when it's needed.
Okay, let's touch on managing some specific challenges that come up often. Sleep disturbances.
Yeah, huge issue. Affects over 40% of people with dementia. But the strong recommendation is to avoid using benzodiazepines, drugs like Valium or Xanax, for sleep.
Why is that?
They carry significant risks in this population. They can actually worsen cognitive impairment, increase the risk of falls dramatically, and even trigger delirium. Non-drug approaches to sleep hygiene are preferred first line.
What about pain? You mentioned the pain aid scale.
Pain is another major, often hidden issue. Between 25% and 50% of older adults generally experience persistent pain, but it's frequently overlooked and poorly assessed in people with dementia.
Because they can't communicate it easily.
Exactly. They might struggle to say, "I hurt." So the pain manifests instead as behavioral symptoms, maybe agitation, aggression, withdrawal. And unrelieved pain is terrible. It worsens mood, sleep, appetite, cognitive function, and definitely increases the risk of falls. Proper pain assessment and management are critical.
And eating difficulties in later stages, you mentioned that earlier.
Yes, very common. And the clear recommendation here is that caretaker assistance with oral feeding is the preferred approach, helping someone eat by mouth, patiently adapting food textures if needed.
Is that better than tube feeding?
The evidence says it's at least as good as tube feeding for maintaining comfort and functional status, and it actually lowers the risk of aspiration pneumonia and death compared to tube feeding in advanced dementia.
Really? Tube feeding has more risks.
Yes. Feeding tubes come with significant risks in this population. They can cause agitation, often lead to the need for physical restraints, increased risk of pressure ulcers from immobility, and the procedure to place the tube itself carries about a 1% fatality risk. Because of this evidence, the use of feeding tubes in advanced dementia in the U.S. actually dropped dramatically, from 12% in 2000 down to 6% by 2014. Oral-assisted feeding is the way to go.
That's really important information. What about exercise again, in terms of management?
Still beneficial, even after diagnosis. Exercise programs can help improve the ability to perform daily activities, maintain mobility and independence for longer, and remember that prevention stat. 2.5 hours per week of balanced strength and balance exercises might reduce Alzheimer's risk by about 50%. It likely helps slow progression too.
Okay. And finally, assistive technology and digital health. What's the role there?
It's an evolving area. The sources note there isn't a ton of high-quality scientific evidence, yet specifically for memory support tools, but there are many applications being used and explored.
Like what?
Things like simplified clocks or calendars, communication aids, remote monitoring systems, GPS tracking devices for wandering wrist, even home care robots are being developed. In-home cameras, medication reminders or dispensers, lots of practical aids.
Any more cutting-edge stuff?
Yeah, there's exciting exploration of using virtual reality to perhaps elicit memories or improve well-being. And technology, even simple video calls, can definitely help alleviate loneliness and promote social connections, which we know is important. Telemedicine is also proving useful for cognitive assessments and follow-up, though we have to be mindful of the digital divide.
Meaning not everyone has equal access.
Exactly. Unequal access to technology or the internet, or lacking the digital skills, especially among older adults or those in rural areas. And sensory impairments can make using tech difficult too, so it's promising, but needs careful implementation.
That makes sense. It's clear that managing dementia requires this really broad, holistic, and compassionate approach.
Absolutely. It's about supporting the whole person and their whole support system through a very challenging journey.
Let's zoom out again now and look at the global scope. The sheer numbers we found are pretty staggering.
They really are.
An estimated 55 million people living with dementia worldwide back in 2021, and close to 10 million new cases cropping up each year.
10 million new cases a year.
And the projection is that this number could exceed 150 million by 2050. It's also ranked as the 7th leading cause of death globally in 2021. And the risk just climbs steeply with age doubling roughly every 6.3 years.
And within those numbers, there's a significant gender disparity. 2 out of every 3 people with Alzheimer's dementia are women.
2/3 women. Why is that?
It's complex and not fully understood, likely a combination of women living longer on average, and possibly some biological factors related to hormones or genetics. But it means women are disproportionately affected, both by having the disease and by being the primary caregivers, as they often are.
Which highlights the issue of inequalities and inequities in dementia.
It's hugely important. Socioeconomic status, for example. Individuals with low socioeconomic status can have more than 3 times the risk of developing early-onset dementia compared to wealthier individuals.
8 times.
And if you combine low socioeconomic status with unhealthy lifestyle factors, that risk can jump to 440% greater. It's enormous. People in rural areas also often face bigger hurdles in getting a timely diagnosis and accessing health and social care services.
And outcomes differ too.
Yes. Studies show those from the most deprived areas are more likely to end up hospitalized, visit the emergency department more often, sometimes receive potentially inappropriate medication, and have higher 1-year mortality rates after diagnosis.
Are there differences based on race and ethnicity as well?
Significant differences, yes.
Yeah.
Both in the incidence rates and risk factors across different racial and ethnic groups, and also in care experiences. For instance, some research from the U.S. indicated that Black individuals are at risk of receiving more futile and invasive treatments towards the end of life compared to white individuals. There are complex systemic factors at play there.
It's sobering. And the overall cost is massive, too, isn't it?
Immense. The societal and financial costs are astronomical. Globally, it was estimated around $818 billion back in 2015. The projection for 2050, $9.12 trillion.
Trillion. And the burden on caregivers.
Huge and often hidden. We saw that UK stat. Almost 2 out of 3 carers reported feeling lonely. It's isolating, exhausting work. Add to that the low public understanding we talked about, only 42% in England knowing it's terminal, and the persistent stigma.
Stigma's still a big issue.
Massive. 88% of people living with dementia reported experiencing discrimination in one survey. That's why awareness campaigns and sometimes high-profile figures sharing their diagnoses can be so important in chipping away at that stigma and encouraging open conversation.
It really puts it all in perspective. Before we wrap up, it's interesting to look back briefly at how our understanding has evolved.
Yeah, it's quite a journey. Way back 7th century BC, Pythagoras talked about senium as this sort of inevitable mental decay in old age. Aristotle had similar ideas.
But not everyone agreed. No, the Roman statesman Cicero had a more progressive view, actually suggesting that staying mentally active could help stave off cognitive decline, quite ahead of his time.
And then the big leap forward.
It was really with Alois Alzheimer's in the early 20th century. In 1907, he described the specific brain changes, those plaques and tangles we discuss, in a patient named Auguste Deter who had progressive dementia. Then Emil Kraepelin coined the term Alzheimer's disease in 1910. That was the pivotal moment in recognizing it as a distinct disease process, not just senility or normal aging.
Moving away from senile dementia.
Exactly, differentiating specific diseases from what was previously thought to be an inevitable part of getting old.
And looking forward now. Where's research heading?
Lots of directions, obviously. But one exciting area mentioned in the sources is the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Researchers are exploring how AI algorithms might help analyze complex data like brain scans, genetic information, cognitive test results to potentially improve early diagnosis, predict progression, and maybe even help tailor treatment plans in the future.
Using AI to find patterns we might miss.
Potentially. Yeah, it's still early days, but holds promise.
So, we've really covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into dementia. It's undeniably complex, often challenging, but hopefully, understanding these nuances helps empower all of us. Key takeaways for me are, it's absolutely not a normal part of aging. Those early signs can be really subtle changes in smell, trouble with finances, not just memory. So many risk factors are modifiable through lifestyle, and compassionate, person-centered care is just paramount for improving quality of life.
Absolutely. And maybe a final thought for you to consider. This deep dive really shows us that while dementia presents these profound challenges, perhaps the biggest shift we can all make, individually and as a society, is in how we perceive and proactively support brain health throughout our entire lives.
Rather than just reacting when problems start.
Exactly. Challenging those old, ingrained notions that cognitive decline is just inevitable as we get older. Instead, fostering a culture that values brain wellness, encourages protective lifestyles, and provides early support when changes first appear. That might be the most powerful change of all.
That's a great provocative thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope you feel more informed, more aware, and maybe encouraged to continue your own learning, engage with these insights, and support those in your life who might be affected by dementia.